Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tiara, aka Bookworm Babe, and today I am finally getting to a video I've been wanting to do for such a long time, and it is my video on writing tips, which I plan to follow up with a video on editing tips and things that are all along that line. So full disclaimer, this is not me trying to say that like I'm, the best writer ever, or the number one person that you should listen to when it comes to like writing skills and tips and stuff like that. But I do write regularly and contribute to different like platforms and stuff like that, as well as just a lot of like free writing I like to do myself. So these are just things that I've picked up over the last year, I'll say, and some of them might seem kind of like cheesy or like you've heard them before, but honestly I used to think the same thing until I find myself now a lot deeper into my practice, and they're actually really good tips, and they're actually things that we should do our best to apply to our writing practices. And even if you are a casual writer and you just like to do these things for fun or for your own like expression, or even if you are slowly working up the courage to put your writing out there in whatever form that might be, these tips can be things that will help you get to that point of confidence in your writing, hopefully. The very first tip that I have is to narrow down the genres that you like, and this you can do just by experimenting and playing around with things yourself in whatever capacity that looks like, because there's so many different genres of writing. Obviously, we have fiction, we have nonfiction, we have poetry, there's different strands of all these things, there's different categories. Do you like romance, sci-fi, history, whatever the case is? But there's just so many different types of things that you can, like explore in a writing practice. So I think one of the most important things to do is experiment with different genres, see what you like, see what you don't like, and from there you can identify like your strengths and your weaknesses. So if you are a fan of poetry, you read a lot of poetry, for example, give it a hand and try to write some poetry. Try to experiment with different, styles of poetry, different, what's the word I'm looking for? Experiment with different like poetry structures. Basically, it's just not coming to me, but experiment with things like that and see where that takes you, because you never know. And even if there's a genre that you think that is like completely out of your element, give it a try. Like literally, it won't hurt to just pick up a notebook and give those things a try. And you really never know where it'll end up for you or where the ideas might take you. So if you have a lot of ideas, especially if they're roaming around in your head taking up space, write them down and just try to put them into action, even if literally it's in the most casual way possible. And don't worry about the writing not being good or not being of good quality. Basically, just go for it and allow yourself to experiment and have fun, because the only way you're gonna learn and see what styles work for you and what things that you truly enjoy practicing. Number two, a very common one that everyone hears all the time, is write regularly. And it sounds really cheesy because we get told these things all the time, like, oh, you need to write regularly, write every day, even if it's only for 10 minutes. It's true. It's actually very, very true. Do your best to write something every single day, even if it is a paragraph about your day, even if it's just a couple lines of something you thought of during the day in your head. It all helps. It really does, because you can't get good at something and you can't get confident at something if you don't work on it regularly. If you only really work on your writing like maybe once or twice a month, you're not going to get to a point where you feel confident in putting things out there. Or if you're trying to improve, and get to the next level, you're still not going to get to a place where you're going to level up, at least in maybe the time frame you want to, if you don't practice regularly. So one of the best things to do, at least I find for myself, is I like prompts, because if I think about writing every single day, if I don't have a specific project or article or whatever the case is that I am specifically working on, I may not always have like an idea like, what do I sit down and write today? So I find that prompts are very, very helpful. So you can literally go anywhere online and find prompts. You can go on Pinterest, you can literally just Google, you can go on Instagram. We're all on Instagram all the time anyway. You can literally search in like the hashtags on Instagram for writing prompts, and I think that is those are useful too, because sometimes when you get into like different spaces on the internet, you find some cool things. So you can follow like writing accounts, you can follow like blogs, whatever works for you, but there are so many different like spaces on the internet where you can find prompts and things like that to jumpstart your writing on like a daily basis. So things like that, highly suggest. And I won't say it's necessary, but it does help, is if you can find free workshops or writing groups or things like that, those really help. I took a couple workshops over the last couple of months, and it really opened me up to different things. I did a workshop over the summer. It was like 2 months long, and it was focused on telling your story, like your personal story, through creative monologues. And the program was run by an organization called Shades of a Brown Girl. So it was specifically for brown women, in whatever that may look like for you. And we worked on the different elements of storytelling and just coming into our personal space and story through a whole bunch of different elements, and it was so good. And the workshop helped so much. And like the monologue, you know, I've never written a monologue before, but like I was very happy with the work that I came up with at the end, just because of the place it came from. And having that like weekly meeting every week, it gave me something to dedicate myself to, basically. So it was like a habit. Every Thursday evening I was booked. So things like that create habits, which also really help with you know, trying to regularly kind of get into a practice as well. So the next 2 tips are going to be a little more technical in terms of like writing devices and stuff like that. And these are things that I learned this year and a little bit before this year, really. But again, like I'm really seeing how they play in, how they're really important. So the first or the third tip this will be is use strong verbs. So this is a more technical tip here, but when you're writing, you want to try to really bring whatever you're saying to life in the best way possible. So one way that you can do that, and this is even through your editing process, is, you know, you cut out words that don't belong, words that aren't really necessary, or if, you know, whatever the case is. It doesn't belong, it's too wordy, it's not the right word. So one thing I learned this year is the use of strong verbs. And this is something that when I edit now, I genuinely try to like be conscious of and apply to whatever I'm writing. So for example, if you wrote, you know, he closed the door angrily, instead of doing that sentence, you can say, you know, he slammed the door. Hopefully that makes sense, but it's basically you're replacing the adverb with something that is stronger. Or instead of saying something like she ate hungrily, you can say she devoured her food. You know, it's just a stronger way of depicting whatever you're saying. If somebody is really hungry and they get food, that's great. You know what I mean? They're obviously hungry and they're gonna really like get into that meal. So something like that just like intensifies whatever you're saying. You know what I mean? Instead of saying like I pulled on my hat, you can say I yanked my hat on. You know, it's just it just gives a little more to whatever you're saying, and it can really help with whatever point or whatever story you're trying to illustrate. And whether that's like a personal piece of work, whether it's like poetry, whether it is a fictional story, it's just using stronger verbs really helps whatever you're trying to say and makes the whole sentence stronger. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's something that I have found very helpful. So the next technical tip, so this is tip number 4, is to show, don't tell. Holy crap. So I had a teacher when I was in college. She used to tell us this endlessly, and I understood it, but I didn't understand it because clearly I didn't do a good job according to him. So it wasn't obviously something that sunk into me right away. But I kind of understand it a lot more now, and I'm a bit older than I was then, so I just have a better grasp on this now. So basically when I say show, don't tell, it's if you have the opportunity in a scene or whatever you're writing to show your reader instead of telling them, you need to act on it. So instead of, for example, writing out a scene, you know, if you have two characters talking and through this dialogue something advances, like say the two characters are speaking and one finds out that their friend is pregnant, just random example off the top of my head, but instead of telling the reader through, you know, another paragraph that these two friends spoke, for example, and you know, one is now, you know, expecting a child, you can you can show them through something like dialogue. So instead you can orchestrate that scene through a set of dialogue and have that conversation basically, you know, work out the situation. They can have even if it's a short amount of dialogue, but you can accompany this by, you know, lines that basically frame what you're saying. So, you know, like friend A was nervous as she looked over to friend B. Friend B says, and then you can start, you know, your dialogue. Friend B says something and it just shows weave in basically whatever the point is that you are trying to say. But instead of, I hope that makes sense, but yeah, instead of telling, like literally telling us, so friend B and friend A get together for coffee, have a conversation and learns this, you can illustrate it through your, you know, different literary techniques, through a conversation, through, you know, things like that are able to show your reader, like literally put them there and put them into like this nervous conversation or this excited conversation without literally just telling them like, we had an exciting conversation about my expecting baby. You know, tell them like, show them that this was an exciting conversation through an actual exciting dialogue of conversation. So that is something that it gets a little tricky because sometimes we don't realize that we're telling instead of showing. But when you get a little more practice and you kind of get a better grip on it, because it took me a while to really understand this and I can't even say like I'm a pro at it now, it is just something that I have learned to be more conscious of. So it's something that I would definitely say just try to be conscious of in whatever you're writing, and ask yourself, can I show this situation, this scene, this conversation without, you know, telling? And hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And my very last tip, so tip number 5, is edit. You gotta edit your work. You seriously need to edit your work if you want to get to a place where you're confident to submit things or propose them or whatever the case is. And I never used to do this when I was in school. If I finished a piece of writing, I would just send it off and that was it. I never touched it again because I didn't want to. I was like, why? Like, why do I have to look over this? Why do I have to edit it? I don't want to. It was painful writing it enough the first time. Now I don't want to read it again. So that wasn't a great habit. Definitely it wasn't. And now again, like I've come to a place where I see the importance of editing things and just how much of a difference it makes. And when I say edit, I don't mean read things in your head. Like don't just, you know, sit there like this and, you know, just read it in your head. No, you need to read things out loud. That is specifically what I should say. You need to read things out loud. Reading it out loud, you catch the flow, you catch any grammar that doesn't make sense. If you have a comma and suddenly you're like, why do I have this comma here? You know what I mean? If you have quotations that don't make sense, if you have like a question or just something that's framed in the wrong way, you're like, okay, this line is more of a question, it needs a question mark. Or you're like, why did I put a question mark here? This is more of like a statement, it doesn't need a question mark. You catch these things when you read things out loud to yourself. I can't stress it enough. And it's something that I've absolutely gotten into the habit of doing now. Every article I write, every whatever that I send off, I will read everything out loud before I send it off. And I will do it at least twice. Just at least twice. You know what I mean? I'm not saying you have to do it 10 times. If depending on the size of the project you're working on and the stakes, you might want to do it 10 times. But at least do it. I would say at least do it twice. You can do it once to catch whatever there is to catch and make your adjustments. And once you make your adjustments to that first one, then read it a second time and see if they make sense, and then maybe even apply it again and again. Because if you read it a second time and you're like, ooh, things still kind of sound weird, you might need to fix and then read a third time. But I would say at the very minimum, read your work out loud twice. It honestly makes a huge difference. So that wraps up, and those are my 5 writing tips that I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope that you guys find this video helpful, and I hope that these are tips that, you know, maybe will be very helpful. I'm like hoping to, you know, those of you who are, you know, looking to expand a writing practice, build a writing practice, if you're starting from square literally 1 or whether you're at, you know, square 10, it doesn't matter. I think these are just little things that we can all kind of apply, and I know, like I said, some of them might sound common or cheesy, because I used to think the same thing when I had like teachers or whatever tell me these things. I was like, whatever, they're cheesy, or like, whatever, who has time for it's true though. It really is true, and it can be tough to try to build these like habits and routines, but this is where I say, like, getting into things, like if it's applicable, or if it's, you know, possible for you to even have like a group of, like a friend group that likes to write, and you guys have like that accountability, or even if you join like a workshop or like a program or something like that that gives you like a weekly accountability, like you have like exercises or stuff to complete, it just helps you build discipline. And I find with writing, that's the biggest thing. Like you need a discipline, because sometimes you're not going to be in the mood to write, but if you have things like if you want to practice writing as, like, you know, a job, for example, or like a freelance, or like you want to write for example, like a certain magazine platform, whatever the case is, you're gonna have deadlines, you're gonna have to write regularly, and you're not always gonna wake up and be like, I'm in the mood to write this article. So that's where the discipline comes in, and I think some of these things will help. And then the couple technical things that I mentioned will just help you have a stronger piece before you send it in, or before you know, give it an edit yourself. Because if you put in a decent amount of work to the initial piece, it will still make your editing a little bit easier. Whereas when you slop it all together, you're gonna have a hell of a time in your editing process, and then you may not even want to do it. So again, those are just some more things to kind of think about and consider. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I am thinking for next week I want to do some like specific editing tips to follow up to this video, so hopefully that will be a good follow-up and will be helpful as well. Give me a thumbs up or a comment if you like this, and if you found it helpful, and if you want to see more like tips and stuff like this, and I will be making more. I will see you guys next week in my next video, and we will talk more about writing and editing and stuff. Bye!